Next item of business is a debate on motion 22119 in the name of Fiona Hislop on the Advisory Group on Economic Recovery recommendations. Can I invite members who wish to speak in this debate to press the request to speak buttons now, and I invite Fiona Hislop to speak and move the motion. Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, on the 21st of April, I informed Parliament that we had adopted a four-step plan to responding to the economic impacts of COVID-19 using a respond, reset, restart and recover approach. The Scottish Government has brought forward a £2.3 billion response package of measures in the form of grant payments, loans and rates relief, and a £230 million restart economic stimulus with capital for shovel-ready and growth projects. Tailored to the specific needs of the Scottish economy, these measures have provided a lifeline for businesses, workers and the self-employed as they negotiate the immediate crisis, providing specific support for hard-hit sectors such as tourism and hospitality, as well as the creative industries. I've previously recognised the UK Government's role in supporting business as per the Conservatives' amendment. Our additional schemes are not available elsewhere and have been geared to addressing gaps in the UK Government support. As part of resetting workplace safety needs, we have produced sector-specific workplace guidance with business and unions in advance of restart to help them reopen as soon as it is safe for them to do so. And I do recognise the Liberal Democrats' amendment, and I'm sure Willie Rennie heard the Deputy First Minister's comments in that regard. Irrespective of the measures put in place, COVID-19 has brought about irreversible changes to our society, and we must be realistic about the longer-term implications of these changes on Scotland's economy. COVID-19 has caused death, grief, tragedy and disruption. The economic shock and crisis created by the virus has, though, accelerated thinking, instilled a desire for change and necessitated a radical rethink of priorities. It is a chance to shift the dial of business innovation and practices and an opportunity to accelerate the drive to create a greener, fairer and more inclusive wellbeing society. I informed Parliament on the 21st of April of our intention to establish an independent advisory group on economic recovery led by Benny Higgins. I tasked this group to provide expert advice on supporting the different regions and sectors of Scotland to recover in a way that facilitates our transition towards a greener, net zero and wellbeing economy. The advisory group's report towards a robust, resilient wellbeing economy for Scotland was published on Monday and contains 25 recommendations for both the Scottish and UK governments as well as other actors in the economy. I would like to record my thanks to the expert members of the advisory group for their commitment over the past 2 months to produce a set of recommendations which provide such a strong foundation upon which to rebuild and reshape our economy. By applying their energy and expertise to developing these recommendations in such a short space of time, members of the advisory group have given us the platform to act swiftly, purposely and I hope in consensus as a country in shaping the course and direction of Scotland's economic recovery as we continue to emerge from lockdown. Mr Fraser.
Murdo Fraser.
Cabinet Secretary for giving way. I don't know if she's read the Fraser of Allender Institute response to the Higgins report, but they make the point that while it's a welcome contribution to the debate, there is very little in this that's actually new or different from what has gone before. Can you tell us what's new in this report?
Cabinet Secretary.
I think one of the major differences as an acknowledgement of some of the debt issues that many companies will be facing as a result of welcome UK government loans, for example, but the restructuring of business may require some type of intervention. I'm not saying that it's blanket, and I think the Greens amendment indicates that there are issues that might have to be addressed on that point. I have raised the issue of equity stakes, for example, with the Chancellor. I know that we are thinking cross-government, not just in Scotland, but also the rest of the UK. What that means, that's one example. But I do appreciate that the direction is very similar to what we've proposed previously in relation to a green recovery, but also digital action. I think what it does do is provide that foundation and acceleration of what we need to do, and I hope the Chamber can come with us on that. Throughout May and June, the group has engaged directly with key stakeholders. It's received over 375 submissions from individuals and organisations. The breadth of the responses confirms the value of the advisory group process. I'd like to thank all the businesses, trade unions and third sector organisations, as well as the wide range of individuals who, despite the challenging circumstances, brought forward analysis and shared their knowledge and insights. Our enterprise agencies also played a crucial role in enabling the advisory group to undertake robust and extensive engagement with the business community, and I would also like to express my gratitude to them. In particular, I must thank the Chair of Scottish Enterprise, Lord Smith of Kelvin, for convening a number of roundtables, giving businesses the opportunity to feed their views into the group. The 25 recommendations are wide-ranging and challenging, which reflects both the breadth of the engagement undertaken and the diversity of factors which make up a robust, resilient, wellbeing economy. A theme that emerges strongly is the need to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past, where the impact of recessions have been exacerbated by retrenchments in public spending. I wholly support the group's clear view that as we come out of the recession caused by the pandemic, we must not return to austerity. Instead, the report identifies the need for targeted investment to support and stimulate the economy through an investment-led recovery. This requires either an increase in our budget or new mechanisms for raising capital. As the Cabinet Secretary for Finance noted in Parliament on the 16th of June, the Fiscal Framework was not designed to deal with the impact of a pandemic. Greater flexibility is needed to fully respond to the crisis. Benny Higgins, in both his foreword and at the Daily Press briefing yesterday, outlined the implications of the pandemic, identifying that, and I quote, "The last few months have exposed and illuminated the scale of inequality across the world and here in Scotland, and the central importance of the role of education in the reconstruction of the economy is unarguable." He also highlighted that the prospect of an inevitable sharp rise in unemployment demands direct and urgent intervention, and I agree on all three counts. The report provides a series of recommendations to address these themes. On inequalities, the report highlights that advancing equality and eradicating discrimination must be at the heart of Scotland's recovery, embedded in the design, delivery and review of policy responses at all levels of government. I support this view. Not only is the right thing to do, as the report makes clear, equality is fundamental to a robust and resilient economy. We cannot ignore the continued inequality that persists in our society and exposed so clearly by the pandemic. Advancing equality must pervade all aspects of our recovery plans. On education, the report states that Scotland's recovery must be education-led, prioritising alignment of our skills base to the changes in the economy. The report identifies the need for coordinated action across this education and skills provision to achieve this. COVID-19 has given rise to new economic trends and accelerated existing ones. Our education and skills system are the foundation of an inclusive, fair and prosperous society and must be adapted to the new realities. As I informed Parliament on the 2nd of June, the Scottish Government's commitment to investing in and developing Scotland's skill base is only strengthened by the pandemic, and the report's recommendations will help us to direct funding to where it is most valuable. On unemployment, the advisory group's report identifies that rising unemployment will be a key challenge for Scotland's economy. Increases in unemployment will disproportionately affect young people moving from education into the labour market, and previous recessions have shown that the repercussions of this will permanently impact on the career prospects of this group unless action is taken to address it. So we must plan for the impact of increased unemployment, particularly on young people, which is why we have asked the Enterprise and Skills Strategic Board to look specifically at issues related to unemployment, and I agree with Labour and the Green Party amendments in that regard. I welcome the recommendation of a new collaborative partnership with business to deliver change and action on recovery. COVID-19 has taught us just how important the dynamic between business and government truly is. We need to draw on all talents and expertise in a focused way with purpose, action and results. We all need to be part of building and creating the post-COVID world, and the report quite rightly places expectations on both governments and business. As someone who 22 years ago was seconded into government by the CEO of the company I worked for at the time, Standard Life, to provide marketing advice on launching the new Labour government's New Deal, helping young people into employment, I know the value of these connections. This government is committed to building a relationship with the business community to take this forward. So, Presiding Officer, in closing, what unifies these recommendations is the need for a renewed partnership across the public, the private and third sectors, and indeed with this Parliament, one that is united around a shared purpose and a vision for our economy. COVID-19 has been cruel, but we cannot let it defeat us or rob our children of their future. We must establish the partnerships required to create a robust, resilient, wellbeing economy for Scotland. And together we can use the strengths, the ingenuity and the common collective will of Scotland to recover well for all the people we are here to serve. I am committed to working across the Chamber and with the UK Government in order to achieve this. I commend this report to Parliament and I move the motion in my name.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. I now call on Maurice Golden to speak to and move Amendment 22-119.2.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. What started as a health crisis has become an economic crisis too. Since March, Scotland's economy has shrunk by a quarter. Tens of thousands risk losing their jobs and businesses face collapse. We learnt today that the iconic Braehead facility in Renfrewshire has gone into administration. This is a hammer blow for workers and families in Renfrewshire and the whole of the west of Scotland, and we must do all we can to save it. Of course, the UK has provided a safety net for Scotland. A third of the entire workforce, almost 800,000 Scottish jobs, have been saved by the UK Government's job retention scheme. As the Advisory Group on Economic Recovery made clear, recovering from this crisis must include tackling inequality, combating climate change and ensuring the well-being of our citizens. The Scottish Conservatives welcome those aims and will work constructively to achieve them. Indeed, as today's motion recognises, significant effort is needed from every sector of society. That must include the private sector, which accounts for 79% of jobs, and the third sector, which will be increasingly important in supporting communities in the months ahead. Key to our long-term recovery will be education, because of its power to create opportunity, lift people out of poverty, and provide the skills our economy needs, as well as the jobs directly and indirectly dependent on the sector. But a generation of young people have had their future jeopardised by massive disruption to their education. Beyond the need to get pupils and students supported by face-to-face learning, even if partially delivered online, we need more help for those who have fallen furthest behind. I also recognise the importance of the Liberal Democrats' concerns about the effect of school closures on childcare and on women's employment. We will be supporting that amendment today. Those aged 16 to 24 will be hardest hit by job losses, though. No doubt a consequence of the fact that many work in the worst affected industries, such as hospitality. As such, the report's recommendation of a job guarantee scheme, as highlighted in Labour's amendment, is worth investigating, although we obviously need to review the detail, and we'll be supporting Labour's amendment today as well. Training will be vital to help those affected find new employment and build the skills base we need to create a green economy and take advantage of emerging industries. Digital services, for example, will only become more important after the experience of recent months, with positive impacts on flexible working, the environment and business services. We must embed those benefits in the recovery, whilst also attracting new digital services and jobs. Supporting higher education to offer the needed skills is essential for that, as is improving our infrastructure, where we lag behind Wales in data centre capacity and have seen ultra-fast broadband rolled out too slowly. However, a green recovery can start immediately. In the oil and gas sector, we have workers with transferable skills to help us secure decommissioning work, roll out renewables and other net zero projects as part of a just transition. That keeps those jobs in Scotland and secures the long-term future of communities throughout Scotland. Yes.
Cabinet Secretary.
I very much agree with him, and he's highlighted some of the points that are from the report, some of them not. But in relation to that transferability of skills, does he welcome the £62 million Energy Transition Fund to precisely support the industries he's referring to in the northeast of Scotland?
Maurice Gold.
Yes, I do, but we need more action from the Scottish Government in this area. For example, ensuring we have deep port capacity for decommissioning here in Scotland. Currently, if you're doing a single lift platform from one of the 471 platforms in the North Sea, you have to go to Tyneside or Teesside, and I think opportunities to build yard capacity here in Scotland would be most helpful. Furthermore, for anyone doubting this approach, research from Scottish Power shows a net zero strategy could support up to 10,000 jobs. It also helps preserve our natural capital, which underpins much of our economy. Agriculture, food and drink, and culture and tourism are all reliant on our natural heritage. A green recovery also improves general well-being. Recent adaptations to support active travel have seen increased exercise levels, improved mental health, reduced congestion, and improved access to services for those without cars. But without adequate attention and a renewed focus on behaviour change, those adaptations will only be temporary. So too, efforts to install energy efficiency improvements and low-carbon heating in our homes. Both could tackle fuel poverty, reduce emissions, and create jobs. Ideally, local firms would get this work because for every £1 spent with a local SME, it generates an additional 63 pence of value for the local economy. We must offer immediate help to businesses, such as reviewing social distancing regulations safely, easing planning rules on outdoor trading, and urging people to buy local. This serves to highlight something missing from yesterday's report. While its overall objectives are to be welcomed, there is no detail on how to achieve them. I understand ministers will be setting out a response in late July. Without wishing to preempt that, it must provide the detail when and how the economy can restart and with what support. It must also explain how things will be done differently this time, because with the utmost respect to the current ministers who were not in post, many of the report's recommendations could have been achieved in the 13 years the SNP have been in power. Don't misunderstand this. This is not a political point. We're all working towards the same goal of recovery. But lessons must be learned so we can do things differently and show boldness and imagination now required to emerge from this crisis. I move the amendment in my name.
Thank you very much. I now call on Richard Leonard to move and speak to Amendment 2219.4. Richard Leonard.
Thank you. And can I begin by welcoming many of the recommendations of the Advisory Group's report. The analysis that young people are more likely to be on insecure contracts, in low-paid work and in locked-down sectors is important in understanding the scale of the challenge which they face, and so the scale of the challenge that we face as a society, which is why the call for a job guarantee scheme, a Scottish guarantee, to counter the huge rise in youth unemployment is one we have been making for some time and we will continue to make. And so it is welcome to see it as a central conclusion of this report, and I hope that the government will not just vote for the amendment, but will do it. Will give our young people a guarantee, a quality job or a quality training place. Yes?
Gillian Martin.
To Richard Leonard for taking my intervention. He often stands up in the chamber and talks about precarious contracts. Would he welcome the employment law to come to the Scottish Government and Parliament so that we can make sure that there's no precarious contracts in Scotland anymore?
Richard Leonard.
Yeah, I've previously said on quite a number of occasions that I'm in favour of the devolution of employment law, and not least in the context of Brexit, where we will see a transfer of powers from the EU to the UK, and they should come to this Parliament, in my view. But it's important that the report also identifies national leadership. For those of us who have lived through times of mass unemployment and know what it does to the fabric of society, to the fabric of families, the unequal burden of it, it's important to note that the advisory group explicitly states that there can be no repeat of the mistakes of the 1980s. And while the report talks variously of tight public finances, it is also clear in its view that, I quote, "Another round of austerity is not the right answer." And so I hope that the Cabinet Secretary for Finance has got that message too, and that she recognises the importance, as the report also highlights, of, and I quote it again, direct funding to families as a way of getting the economy moving again, which is why the decision to delay the Scottish child payment just at the very point when child poverty in Scotland is going up needs to be reversed, and reversed fast. We live at a time when there is no shortage of useful, purposeful work to be done, when a just and green recovery must be our goal. We still have older people shivering in the cold in our winters, suffering from hypothermia, whilst engineers and electricians will be looking for work. So let's have that green investment in domestic heating and in energy efficiency to generate the jobs that we need. We still have over 150,000 households on housing waiting lists across Scotland. And so whilst in the weeks ahead, construction workers may have idle hands and apprentices could be trained, we need to see action in this area and a major council house building programme. And let's give local councils the resources that they need. We know that our schools are calling out for extra teachers, for extra resources to build the capacity that they need, not least to meet the consequences of the Deputy First Minister's U-turn this afternoon. And transport investment is rightly identified as a priority in the report, so let's look urgently at bringing the railways back into public ownership and bus services back into municipal ownership too. That we need an investment-led recovery is often asserted, but not always acted upon. So bringing forward the Scottish National Investment Bank's bond issuing rights to pave the way for investment in housing and infrastructure projects is correct. But I think that the Cabinet Secretary should be pressing now for the Scottish National Investment Bank itself to be up and running, not by the end of the autumn or by early winter, but by the middle of this summer. We need it now. This is a national emergency. The extension of community wealth building, the idea that we should be building more democracy into the economy, cooperative ownership, employee ownership, a revamped Cooperative Development Scotland agency would be an important start in the pursuit of that goal. But let me finish by touching on an area where I do not think the report does go far enough. It does not properly recognise the need for economic planning and the importance of a national plan for the Scottish economy. It does not properly recognise the importance of bringing together employers, trade unions, government and agencies to democratically plan at an industry level where we want to be not just next year, but in 5 years' time and in 10 years' time. We need a plan which is comprehensive, which works for the whole of Scotland, which is effective, action-oriented, which focuses on delivery and is accountable to this Parliament. That will take resolve, commitment and conviction. But that must be our duty, because after what we have been through, after the sacrifices which have been made and are still being made, the lives lost, we cannot allow the people to be demoralised. We must lift their spirits, give them hope to rediscover their self-confidence. Hope, a burning flame of hope. Hope that we cannot go back to the old inequalities. Hope that instead we can dare to not only think big, but dare to act radical as well. Hope for a just and green recovery. Hope that so that together we can build a better future. We can build a better Scotland. I move the amendment in my name.
Thank you very much. And I now call on Andy Whiteman to speak to and move Amendment 22119.3. Andy Whiteman.
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer, and I move the amendment in my name. Like others, I welcome this report. We've been looking forward to it. I can't say I've read every page of it. It is a long report, and I look forward to getting to grips with it in more detail. But I think it's important to reflect at the beginning here that we're talking about two distinct issues, and it's not clear from the report that it does so successfully. First of all, we're dealing with a recovery over the coming months and year, and maybe 18 months. That's recovering from the state we're in now, which is not a good place. But there's a second and arguably more important, certainly longer-term restructuring that our economy needs to ensure greater equality, resilience and security for our population. And I'm not clear that that longer-term focus has been paid much attention to, because the danger, the clear danger, is that we attempt, and hopefully we're successful in doing the first, but we ignore the second. Now, of course, we're having this debate against a backdrop in which real wages still remain below 2008 levels, whereas other members have pointed out inequalities that were there before the crisis have been exacerbated. Indeed, the pain felt over the past 3 months has been disproportionately experienced by those on lower incomes who remain in risky work, by women, by young and the BME community. And it's fallen disproportionately on those who earn an income by their labour, as opposed to those who are in receipt of unearned income and economic rent from the ownership of capital, whether that be shares, gilts or land and property, from which rent must continue to be derived upon pain of eviction and court orders. And so those who have earned their incomes have done worse than those who collect economic rent through asset ownership. And there's nothing in the Economic Recovery Report about this. And as the TUC reflected with the high pay unit a few months ago in a report, the returns to shareholders over the period 2014 to 18 in the FTSE 100 companies has grown by 56%. Net incomes over the same period have fallen by 3%, and median wages have only risen by 8.8%. Indeed, if wages had matched shareholder returns, the average worker would be around £10,000 a year better off. Presiding Officer, Green Economics has always been concerned with reversing these trends and ensuring that economies are built around people and not profit. And that's why we welcome the title of the report, Towards a Robust, Resilient Wellbeing Economy for Scotland, and a recovery that has to be built around wellbeing. But wellbeing has to focus on ensuring an end to inequality and an end to insecurity. In that context, I was interested to read the Wellbeing Alliance's initial response to the report, where they say that, unfortunately, parts of it fall short in recognising the type of transformation that could truly transform Scotland into a wellbeing economy. They also criticise, and this is something I've consistently done in Parliament, conflating the interests of business with the interests of the economy. They're not the same thing. And they go on to say, crucially, to truly initiate a wellbeing economy, the restructure must be designed to enable people and planet to flourish while being agnostic to economic growth, not dependent upon it. The fairly sober Fraser of Allender Institute have said that there's little in the report of substantial policy insight that's new or different to what has gone before, and the STUC have made similar points. And I can't help but note a disjunction between what Fiona Hislop argued a month ago when she said we need a revolution in economic thinking, with the outcome of this report that's far short of revolutionary. So whilst there's a lot we welcome, what's missing in this is anything about ownership and governance, anything about finance, new mutual crowdsourced models, anything about local economies and the need to build and strengthen them, nothing about fiscal policy, about shifting from taxing earned income to taxing unearned income, to shifting from taxing incomes to wealth, nothing on basic income, it dismisses that, nothing on a 4-day week, nothing on land reform. I could go on. This is not a something for everyone report, it's a something for a few more than the few who have disproportionately benefited from the pre-COVID economy. Presiding Officer, our amendment does not reflect the ambitions we have for a green wellbeing economy, but adds some clear imperatives on precarious incomes, insecure housing in the private rented sector, and the need to take public stakes in businesses following clearly defined principles. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. Before I call Willie Rennie, can I remind all those who intend to take part in the open debate, please to press their request to speak buttons now, please. Thank you very much. And I call on Willie Rennie to speak.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I start by moving the amendment in my name. I want to add my thanks to the work of Benny Higgins and his colleagues. I'm grateful for the time that he spent with me yesterday and others who contributed to the conference call. It was very enlightening before the official publication of the report. This debate adds to the one that we had last week on the economy. I said last week, and I want to repeat it today, if government seeks to impose a needless masochistic rule to pay off the debts and operates too tight a fiscal arrangement, it will snuff out any economic recovery. There was a lot of work to do in Scotland on the economy, on issues such as low productivity before the virus even struck. The need for this is even more pressing now. I want a high-skill, high-wage economy. It is what we need to build to get us out of this crisis. That is also the case made by Dr. David Skilling in the report. He calls for an increase in investment in research and investment and innovation, new impetus to upgrading of skills and reprioritise support towards strategic growth sectors such as digital, life sciences and green technology. That is why I believe we need new innovative investment in green projects such as carbon capture and storage in the northeast of Scotland. It will be new science and innovative engineering like that that will lift our aspirations and achieve great things for this country. So I was angry back in 2015 when the Conservative government cancelled that project. We've lost so many years in between that we could have made progress on that. The crisis means that, not just now, the crisis means that they need to think again to make sure projects like that can get the go-ahead. Before I comment on other aspects of the report, I want to discuss two very important and clear warnings it gives to the SNP. First is the devastating impact on low-income families from closed schools and childcare. It is why so many people called on the Scottish Government to change its plans and step up to the challenge. The report says very clearly, COVID-19 job disruption is likely to have a disproportionate impact on women's employment as a result of low-paid women being particularly affected by job disruption. And women are potentially faced with an increase in childcare responsibilities as a result of school and nursery closures in the shorter term. I've asked ministers repeatedly to make sure that if a person is required to work, they should have the childcare that they need so that they can work. I cannot believe that ministers hold out against this principle. If you're required to work, you should get the childcare that you need. Last Friday, a teacher reported she wasn't going to be allowed to have childcare from the local hub when she returns to work as a teacher. It's just not good enough. People are required to return to work by their employers because the Scottish Government has accelerated the economic phases but kept childcare and schools at a slower pace. And I'm intrigued by the indications earlier today from the Deputy First Minister that the First Minister tomorrow may say something more on this. And I hope she does, because we need to have a joined-up approach between the economy and the childcare and educational performance. In that way, we can make sure that parents can return to work when they're asked to. The second great challenge to SNP ministers is the call for the regional focus to economic recovery. This flatly flies in the face of every piece of economic centralisation that the SNP have forced through in the last decade. They downgraded regional economic development, and that must be reversed if we're going to have a sustainable, diverse, regionally based economic recovery in the years ahead. Thank you.
We now move to the open debate and speeches of up to 4 minutes, please. We don't have a lot of extra time. Bruce Crawford to be followed by Dean Lockhart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I sincerely thank Benny Higgins and the Advisory Group on Economic Recovery for producing a report with a clear focus, containing real and significant substance. Moreover, to do so in such a compressed time period is impressive. I don't think anyone can doubt that the COVID-19 pandemic has seen the biggest crisis outside wars to hit the world in a century. I sincerely hope we never see its likes again. In a crisis, inevitably, not all decisions made are the right ones, but I support the Scottish Government in prioritising public health during the crisis. Decisions taken have rightly focused on keeping people safe. In Scotland, by far the majority of people support this approach. However, as we all know, this has come at a cost. In responding to the threat of COVID-19 and in order to protect the most vulnerable, we effectively closed down huge chunks of the economy. In the initial weeks of the crisis, Rightly, swift action was the order of the day. Get money out of the door and protect as many businesses as achievable. In these early moments, not every decision taken will have been correct, but where there have been issues, these in the main have been rectified. But I want to turn to the report itself and address in particular the challenges in tourism and hospitality sector. But firstly, can I draw the Economy Secretary's attention to an area that I believe badly needs action if we are to avoid some good businesses going to the wall. I refer here to businesses that have their home as their office or HQ, businesses ranging from pest control companies to online tourism operators. Because they don't pay rates or rent, many have missed out on much-needed grant support. Could I ask the Cabinet Secretary to identify aid for such businesses as a priority? Now, I know that is a tough ask, and given the limits on the Scottish Government's budget, it might well therefore require help from the UK Treasury to enable us to move on that front. But as the report makes clear, getting people back to work is now the top priority. I represent a constituency with a highly important tourism and hospitality sector. I've read the challenges they face in these related businesses in this place numerous times in the past weeks and months. That's why I warmly welcome the report's contribution, recognising, as it does, the serious financial impact on the interrelated tourism, event and hospitality sectors and the need to develop specific solutions for these sectors. Now, the grants provided initially to affected businesses were a welcome lifeline of support. However, the reality is the majority of these businesses remain closed 3 months after lockdown begun. More support is needed if we're to see them trading again sustainably when it's safe to do so. Many pubs, restaurants, cafes, hotels and tourism-related businesses are seasonal businesses and make the majority of their money during the summer months. Losing this trade means they could find themselves in serious trouble, effectively experiencing 3 consecutive winters. This will be true no matter what further easing of lockdown restrictions are introduced from this point. As the report recognises, what's needed now is targeted support, and the advisory group asked the Scottish Government to consider a reduction in business rates for tourism establishments and for the UK Government to reduce VAT for the sector. I'd be grateful to hear the Scottish Government's views on these suggestions as soon as it is in a position to do so. Presiding Officer, I only wish I had more time to explore further ground, particularly in regard to the university sector, renewables and the fiscal situation, but given the limited time, I'll conclude my remarks by again thanking the advisory group for their timely, focused and substantial report. Thank you.
Dean Lockhart, followed by Gillian Martin.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Let me start by adding my thanks to Benny Higgins and his colleagues for their valuable report and constructive recommendations. But I must say I can't help reflecting that this was a missed opportunity. Notwithstanding all the positive outcomes highlighted in Chapter 5 of the report, which we fully support, there is no route map and no detail about the practical policy steps we need to take to achieve those positive outcomes. And this is not the fault of the advisory group. It's the failure of the Scottish Government to set up a proper remit when the advisory group was set up 3 months ago. I will in a second. The opportunity then would have been to ask the advisory group not only what a post-COVID economy should look like, but more importantly to ask what specific policy steps we need to take to get us to that destination. And that's exactly the point made yesterday by the Fraser Vallender when they said that without a focus on practical steps, the risk is that this report will be consigned to the shelf. And we now find ourselves in a position where the Scottish Government will only respond to the report by the end of July, some 6 months after the impact of COVID started to impact workers and their livelihoods. I'll give way. Yes. Sorry.
Who are you giving way to, Mr Lockhart?
The Cabinet Secretary, since Tom Arthur.
Fiona Hislop.
Can I do this very gently? Can the member point to the UK Government's recovery plan or any independent advisory group that they've set up for recovery and when that has been published?
Dean Lockhart.
Well, I'm amazed the Cabinet Secretary has asked that because during the same period I referred to, the UK Government has implemented an unprecedented series of policy interventions that have saved 800,000 jobs in Scotland and delivered more than £10 billion to Scotland. That's the policy. That's saving the economy, Cabinet Secretary. Presiding Officer, turning to some of the central recommendations of the report, we agree that wellbeing should be a central part of economic policy and that business across Scotland will need some form of public sector recapitalisation. However, there are real concerns over the SNP's ability in these areas to deliver. When it comes to wellbeing, under the SNP, Scotland has declined from 16th to 21st place in the most recent international rankings on wellbeing. And when it comes to taking stakes in private sector firms, just last year, more than £150 million in investments were written off at the expense of the taxpayer. So the Scottish Government will have to work hard to convince stakeholders they can deliver in these areas and save countless jobs and livelihoods. Presiding Officer, one of the most striking conclusions, I think, of the report was, after 14 years in power, the SNP has no formal structure in place to engage with economic stakeholders. This observation from the advisory group merely confirms something we have been saying for years. This is a government out of touch on the economy. And that's why, in the weeks ahead, it will be the Scottish Conservatives who will be announcing a series of concrete action plans to get Scotland back to work. Finally, Presiding Officer, the report suggests reform of the fiscal framework, but this would be a needless distraction in a time of crisis. The fundamental issue when it comes to saving jobs is not about constitutional technicalities, it's about how much investment is required to rebuild the economy. And according to Fraser Valander, up to £7 billion of capital will be required to rebuild Scotland's economy over the next 12 months. And simply put, the reality is that this unprecedented level of investment would simply not be possible for the Scottish Government to fund on a stand-alone basis. Presiding Officer, that's why we are calling for the Scottish Government to work with the UK Government in a policy response to rebuild Scotland's economy and to get the very best outcome for Scotland using the unrivalled pooled resources of the United Kingdom. I support the amendment in Maurice Golden's name.
Gillian Martin, followed by Jackie Bailey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Chair of the Advisory Group on Economic Recovery, Benny Higgins, said yesterday that a key element of our fiscal framework is arcane, that was his word, and that the restrictions placed on the Scottish Government to be able to reallocate capital funds to where they might be needed is a significant problem for our recovery. The report also points out the Scottish Government's inability to borrow, which is a tool enjoyed by other governments around the world, which is invaluable in times of crisis. And if this moment isn't a crisis, I don't know what is. An urgent review of the fiscal framework along the lines suggested in this report is the most urgent takeaway for me. In my view, anyone who stands against more flexible fiscal powers to the Scottish Government has absolutely no grounds to complain about limits on spending on any recovery programmes. Cross-party, we all need to get behind this for the sake of our citizens. In my area of the North East, we face a triple crisis: COVID-19, Brexit and a record low oil price, all of which are combining to prompt potentially the worst unemployment that the area will ever have seen if we don't take swift action now. Of course, there's a fourth and potentially more savage crisis, and that is the climate change emergency. And I saw a cartoon by Marie-Anais Hegler recently which showed a boxing ring with planet Earth being pummeled by a muscular figure representing the coronavirus in what was labelled the preliminary round. Standing at the ropes was a much larger, more menacing figure representing climate change, who was waiting to have their go in the next round. And with that in mind, I read the report through the lens of green recovery. The phrase that hit me as most important was this. It was, responding to climate change needs to be a thread through every policy action. If we're serious about a green recovery, an increased focus on skills fit to serve that recovery should be a priority. And I was glad to see that this featured in the recommendations. Investment in skills and innovation in the areas of low-carbon energy is particularly essential. The workforce is there, the ideas are there, the investment, the focus and funding is what we need. The Scottish Government must have the full powers and fiscal arrangements to realise that potential. And I agree with Willie Rennie's comments about CCS and the project that was cancelled by the UK Government in one of the most short-sighted views ever in the history of the last 10 years. I agree with the recommendation also on rebalancing of skills provision to include more work-based apprenticeships. Using the fact that the crisis has given greater impetus to online learning. And I'd like to see us go further by funding green energy innovation projects that take on apprentices too. I would say that taking on at least one apprentice should be a condition of Scottish National Investment Bank or Enterprise Agency funding. I was also very pleased to see fair work mentioned so often in the report. During the pandemic, we've seen a shift in how we work, what we value, and a recognition that those on whom we rely for our most basic needs, the well-being of our nation and our citizens, are often the most undervalued when it comes to fair work practices and salaries. And women make up the majority of those in that previously undervalued but essential work. One recommendation is that the Scottish Government deploys expanding tax powers and business support interventions and makes greater use of conditionality. I welcome what Richard Leonard said in response to my intervention to him, that Scottish Labour will be supporting calls for the devolution of employment law to this place. There's too much to cover in a short speech, Presiding Officer, but for me, an urgent revamp of fiscal powers, emphasis on fair work, skills and green recovery are my top takeaways from an excellent report that I want to see turned into action as soon as possible.
Jackie Bailey, followed by Alex Neil.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Let me join with others in thanking Benny Higgins for his report. There is much that can be welcomed, but this must only be the first step in tackling the recession to come, because we are facing a truly unique set of circumstances, a recession of enormous magnitude, which is unprecedented. Our GDP has plunged by almost 25%. Unemployment is predicted to rise by 10%, and a number of companies, large and small, will cease trading. The OECD predict that the recession in the UK will be one of the worst in the world, and it might be even worse in Scotland because we've been in lockdown longer, more businesses have ceased operating, and we rely on sectors like tourism and hospitality and oil and gas more than in other parts of the UK. So the scale of the solution must self-evidently be equally significant and bold. Now, this report is a helpful contribution, but I view it very much as the opening chapter of a much longer book. Let me welcome the Scottish Jobs Guarantee Scheme, something Labour has been calling for many months now. So too the emphasis on fair work and sectoral bargaining, the investment in digital, the ability to take a stake in private companies, and of course the focus on capital, which I have to say is not really new. The problem with having been around for a long time is you remember what went before, Presiding Officer. 20 years ago we had FEDS, the Framework for Economic Development in Scotland, announced by Donald Dewar and Henry McLeish, followed by the refreshed economic strategy, Smart Successful Scotland, developed by Wendy Alexander. And then after that came John Swinney's economic strategy. And what do they all have in common with today's report? Well, the interventions and the rhetoric are largely the same. FEDS talked about social capital, physical capital, and human capital. This report is indeed similar to the Scottish Government's existing economic policy, which worries me because perhaps it is therefore too timid given the circumstances we face. There is much more, I think, that can be done on a green recovery, which I'd hope to see more of in the report. And there is very little on implementation, as others have touched on. In fact, this is an area which has always challenged the government, great at strategies, but poor at making them real on the ground. And the truth is that with cuts to budgets, economic development capacity in councils and in Scottish enterprise is hollowed out. So where is the action plan with targets and timelines backed by resources? Because we really do need to get a move on. And I am genuinely interested to know how the Scottish Government will pay for those big interventions required. Will budgets be reprioritised? What aren't we going to spend money on anymore? And what about our tax policy? Will the burden be shared more fairly? It is interesting that at a time when poverty is increasing, the SNP response is to delay the child poverty report and delay the Scottish child payment. I am genuinely, no, I don't have a lot of time. I am genuinely disappointed because I think these things are essential, particularly now when poverty is increasing. And I find it very odd that these are the priorities that are brought forward, because they truly resemble more the actions that the Tory party would take. Let me turn to the fiscal framework, because I warned the Cabinet Secretary for Finance that tinkering with the Barnett formula, which is very generous to Scotland, is a dangerous path to tread. There's a lot of noise coming from the backbenches, presiding officer, but so too is bringing forward the substantive negotiations about a future fiscal framework when we don't yet know the scale of the economic impact we face. Secondly, it would be much better to maximise the money being spent in Scotland, and that means the combined spending power of the UK and Scottish governments. What is absolutely right is for the temporary relaxation of restrictions to cope with the current crisis, and we support looking for those flexibilities now. But the wider review should be approached with care. Finally, presiding officer, it's not the normal rhetoric in this chamber to talk about cooperation and consensus, but that is exactly what needs to happen with the UK government, with the Scottish government, so that we have not just a recovery plan from both governments, but we actually get them implemented and we deliver on a much more ambitious prospectus.
Alex Neil, followed by Murdo Fraser. Can I ask members to stick to 4 minutes, please?
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I also welcome this report? I agree with Andy Whiteman. It doesn't include everything, including the kitchen sink, but it sets a very clear direction about what is required in the future. Now, let me pick up both what Dean Lockhart and Jackie Bailey raised about the issue of how we pay for it, because I think Fraser of Allender is right that we probably need to spend something like £7 billion over the next 12 months in Scotland, in addition to the existing budgets, if we are going to be able to recover from the post-COVID economic crisis. The report itself on page 3 starts to address that very issue of where can we get the money. It says there needs to be a plan to unlock financial borrowing at the exceptionally low prevailing long-term interest rates. I agree with that. But what should that plan be? In my view, there is only one plan that's possible, and that is for the Scottish Government, as well as all the other devolved governments in the UK, to be able to borrow directly the money needed for economic recovery directly from the Bank of England, on exactly the same terms and conditions as the UK government is doing. Indeed, the governor of the bank said yesterday his job in the last few months has been to rescue the UK government from going bankrupt. And therefore, the Bank of England isn't just supposed to be of England and for England, it's supposed to be for the rest of the United Kingdom as well. And now's an opportunity for the UK government to give the powers for the Scottish government to have the same borrowing power, paying no interest like the UK government, no timescale for repayment like the UK government, and the power to write off any loans from the Bank of England like the UK government has already done on the money borrowed for the recession. So that is where the money should come from. £7 billion is less than 1% of the £745 billion the UK government has got from the Bank of England in the last 3 months. So, presiding officer, throw the fiscal framework out the window. It is no longer fit for purpose, and give us some real short-term powers that we can use to save the Scottish economy. Now, presiding officer, the question then is, how do we spend the money if and when we get it? I agree entirely with the report when it says the economic recovery has to be an education-led recovery. And I think the statement we heard earlier from the Deputy First Minister shows that's what the Scottish Government agrees as well. But can I make this very specific recommendation to the Scottish Government? Endorse the idea of a job guarantee for the 16 to 25-year-olds. But we need to do something also for the over 25-year-olds, of which I can count myself as one of them. And I would suggest there's a need for a training and employment grant scheme that provides incentives and subsidies to employers to take on people who are unemployed or under the threat of redundancy, with an enhanced subsidy for those who are disabled to encourage employers to recruit them as well. And the final point I would make is this, Presiding Officer. There is talk amongst the Tory backbenchers trying to persuade the Chancellor to end the triple lock on pensions, which is particularly important for the poorest pensioners. That would save £8 billion a year. Let me say this, that would be an utter disgrace to punish the poorer pensioners. There's already £40 billion a year in pension tax relief going to the better off. If they need to find £8 billion, take it out of their pockets, not the poorest pensioners.
Murdo Fraser, followed by Annabel Ewing. 4-minute speeches, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Before I get on to the substance of what I was going to say, I would just gently point out to Alec Neil, he wants to throw the fiscal framework in the bin. Is that fiscal framework that protects the Scottish budget against a decline in tax revenues? And he'll need to explain how he makes up the £12 billion annual deficit in Scotland's finances, currently filled by the union dividend, thanks to the fiscal framework that John Swinney negotiated on behalf of the SNP government. Now, Presiding Officer, one thing we're not lacking in Scotland are reports on the future of the economy. And the Fraser of Allender Institute have often made the argument that we have a whole apparatus of overlapping councils and economic advisory bodies, all producing reports. Whole forests of trees have died to support the report-writing industry, so at least one part of the economy is doing well. And here we have yet another report, this time on economic recovery from coronavirus. And the danger, I think, in all these reports, and it's highlighted in the response from the Fraser of Allender Institute to this, is that more and more reports are not going to change anything. What we actually need is action. Now, one of the specific points suggested in this new report is for the Scottish Government to take a greater financial interest in private sector companies in the future. I have to say, if you look at the Scottish Government's track record in this area, it's not encouraging. Because what we've seen are high-profile investments in Prestwick Airport, in Bifab, in Ferguson Marine, none of which give us much confidence in the Scottish Government's ability to invest public money wisely. And the real challenge will be, if the Government is having to choose which businesses to support in future, they will also have to choose which businesses are going to fail. And that is not a position I would like any Government Minister to be in. No, I've only got 4 minutes. I'm halfway through my time already. The recommendation of a jobs guarantee for young people is a good one, but the problem is it cannot be delivered by governments. Jobs can only be provided by businesses, and it is only if businesses succeed that they will be able to supply employment for young people, or indeed anyone else in the jobs market. And the key to the future of our economy is understanding how businesses in the private sector will be able to thrive in a challenging environment. And in that respect, it was disappointing that so few members of the advisory group who produced this report were themselves directly involved in private sector business. So what can and should be done at this point? Well, I think we need to learn the lessons from the last few months, which give us some pointers for the future. Firstly, it's very likely that in the future, more and more people will work from home. That means that connectivity, good quality broadband is absolutely essential in all of Scotland, particularly in rural areas. This has to be given an even greater priority than it has up until now. Secondly, one of the consequences of this will be that we are likely to see, as a result of more people changing working patterns, less demand for office space. Being a commercial property landlord might not be such an attractive place in the future, and that has serious implications for the likes of pensions and life funds who traditionally invest in these areas. Transport patterns will have to be looked at, with potentially fewer people wanting to travel to work, at least in the short term, people more reluctant to do so on public transport. And the nature of retail is going to change even more rapidly. Before coronavirus, we'd already seen a significant shift to online retail purchases and the decline of the high street. That trend will now be accelerated as people have become even more comfortable with shopping from home. So the decline of the high street is an even greater challenge. In that context, the wholesale review of business rates we have been calling for years has become much more acute. We also need to properly consider a digital sales tax to levy the playing field between high street sellers and online sellers. And we need to consider how we reimagine the high street of the future, where retail will be a much less significant part. Can we repurpose what were retail shops into other leisure uses or convert them into residential accommodation? And can we align the planning system with that? And finally, Presiding Officer, there is simply no time in the course of this very short debate to properly consider all of these significant issues. While this new report is of assistance in framing the discussions, we're going to need a lot more action and a lot less conversation if we're going to make a difference. Thank you.
Annabel Ewing, followed by Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's quite clear that the backdrop of this report is very much the considerable economic challenges posed by the coronavirus. But at the same time, I think it's very important to note what is also evident in the report, and that is a determination on the part of the group to propose suggestions that would rechart Scotland's economic approach, taking into account the new COVID-19 starting point, but obviously with the focus very much on employment. In the foreword to the report, Benny Higgins, the chair of the advisory group, commented, and I quote, "The public health crisis, which has tragically taken so many lives prematurely, cannot be allowed to lead to an economic one that is socially destructive." And as the MP for Cowdenbeath constituency, a constituency comprised of many disparate areas, including, of course, former mining communities and areas with acute deprivation, that recognition of the need to avoid further scarring of already fragile communities is, to my mind, crucially important. And, of course, it will not be possible in the very short time today to discuss all the findings of the report. We've heard about investment, ownership stakes in companies, about the priority for green investment, for digital infrastructure. I think importantly, it should be mentioned the importance placed on the role of culture and indeed of the third sector. But I would focus briefly on three aspects. First, the recognition of the pivotal role of the private sector, which we note over 70% of Scots work in. So the recognition that it is the private sector that must be at the heart of the recovery plan is very important. And one example here is the recommendation to establish a business-led Scottish Jobs Guarantee Scheme, working in partnership with local authorities and other agencies with targeted funding support from the Scottish Government. This scheme, per the report recommendation, should offer secure employment for a period of at least 2 years to 16 to 25-year-olds paid at the living wage with access to training, apprenticeships and the possibility of progression. I very much welcome this recommendation, Presiding Officer, for at its heart it is a recognition that absent urgent and comprehensive action, a whole generation may be left behind in terms of job prospects. There is also recognition that business must play its role here. It's not just a matter for public agencies, and I welcome that recognition because what we are facing is a massive issue for our whole economy and for our whole society, and we all have a role to play, and it is all hands on deck. There's also recognition at the same time that the relationship between business and government should be refreshed, I think was one word used, and that a new collaborative partnership on the strategy for Scotland's economic recovery be developed. I think that is a very positive suggestion. There were ideas about how that could be achieved, including in terms of secondments and so forth, and we look forward to see how that may be developed when the government responds to the report. And finally, I would say that the issue of the acceleration of the planned review of the fiscal framework highlighted in the report is also crucially important. Indeed, the shortcomings for all rational people are there to see, limitations and opportunities for meaningful policy autonomy, limits on capital borrowing to less than 0.3% of GDP, and even restrictions on transfer between capital and revenue, even in circumstances of a global pandemic. It just doesn't make sense. In conclusion, I would remind the Chamber that Bernie Higgins yesterday indicated that the fiscal response in Europe is beginning to shift from emergency assistance to fiscal stimulus in order to kickstart European economies. He cited Germany, which had just announced a package amounting to around 4% of GDP. In Scotland, that would equate to around £6 billion. If the UK government does not intend to do that, we here in this Parliament should be equipped with the powers to do. so that we can get our economy back on track and tackle the widening inequalities that we see in our country. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
I may have to cut a minute or so off a couple of the closing speeches. The last contribution in the open debate, Kenneth Gibson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I too am grateful to the Economic Advisory Group for their work identifying both issues and solutions. Their guiding principles form an action list, not a shopping list, as they boldly say. While terms like reimagining the economy may be a little overblown, I agree that the pandemic and the damage it continues to inflict on people, businesses and our economy signifies a watershed moment. We need to look with a fresh pair of eyes and use this situation, awful as it is, as a catalyst to find different ways of recovery than after previous economic crisis. The report says, the damage done to the generation currently aged 16 to 25 and their job prospects will be a scar across their working lives if there is no urgent, ambitious and focused intervention to address it. I agree. However, I believe action should be extended to those under 35. Many late 20, early 30-somethings have seen hopes of a home of their own, prospects of starting a family and career prospects dashed due to the economic uncertainty, and we cannot abandon them. Significantly, despite Tory moaning, the business community has welcomed the recommendations. The Federation of Small Businesses said, given the slump in economic output and the jump in unemployment, there is a pressing need to jumpstart the Scottish economy and its vital small business community. Today's report from Benny Higgins sets out a range of options to do just that. The focus on sustaining and generating jobs is the right call if we want to prevent a lost generation, but that can only happen in partnership with small businesses. This is especially true in remote communities where small businesses generate over half of private sector employment. While Glasgow Chamber said, we applaud the focus on investment-led recovery and the need for creation of jobs at an unprecedented rate, and endorse the call for innovation and skilling and reskilling and the need to reduce the impact of the crisis on the futures of our young people. We agree on the prioritisation and delivery of green investments, particularly in the circular economy, and also on the mobilisation of investment in digital infrastructure as a key force for resilience and growth and a direct job creator. While the report identifies wealthy Edinburgh and Aberdeen as Scotland's most economically resilient regions, it puts North Ayrshire, where my own constituency is, last. The potential resilience of areas are based on pre-crisis characteristics and do not account for the relative severity of the difficulties regions will face, for example, due to sectoral impact. But North Ayrshire will clearly need additional support, not least so it can play a full part in Scotland's full economic recovery. As the report recognises, there is no one-size-fits-all approach, and every region needs different solutions, with local partnerships working together. Ensuring the success of growth in city region deals is more important than ever, and they should be accelerated. It's been 15 months since the Ayrshire Growth Deal was agreed on 8th of March 2019, after much dithering by the UK Government. Much work has been done behind the scenes, not least by North Ayrshire Council's officers, but given the position of Ayrshire's economy before COVID-19 and the full impact of, let's be real, a hard Brexit to break over us, time is of the essence. It is paramount that the Ayrshire Growth Deal is implemented. Signing off on actual projects has been imminent for weeks now, and I'm keen to know what steps Scottish ministers are taking to expedite the Ayrshire Growth Deal. While it's hugely important for Ayrshire, we need more help from the Scottish Government to make Ayrshires economy more resilient. In carrying out advisory group recommendations, Ayrshire must be at the forefront with, for instance, potential solutions being piloted in Ayrshire. And I know that as a Cabinet Secretary was herself born in North Ayrshire, in the sunny town of Irvine, I'm sure she agrees. Presiding Officer, the fact that old normal is nowhere on the horizon may be no bad thing for wealthier local economies who can afford to worry about investment in levels of self-actualisation most others can only dream of. But for Ayrshire, this should absolutely be seen as an opportunity to kickstart a less resilient economy with basics such as job creation, retention and attracting inward investment. And I'm glad to see that this report is a major step forward in achieving that. Thank you.
We now move to the closing speeches, and of course all members who took part in the debate should be back in the chamber for these. I call on Willie Rennie for a tight 4 minutes, please.
I think the whips must be back in control of Alex Neil, because last week they weren't successful, because he would have smashed the consensus that had developed across the chamber on the fiscal framework with his ridiculous comments that the Bank of England was only there for England, apparently, ignoring the fact that the job retention scheme and the self-employment schemes and the massive increase in universal credit contributions of £900 million came directly to Scotland. So it's a ridiculous point to make about the Bank of England, and I hope he's away reflecting on those comments somewhere else this afternoon. He's back in the chamber now, perhaps to apologise for such comments. But we need to recognise the contribution of the United Kingdom, because it is through the strength of the United Kingdom that we've got through this immediate crisis. But what we need to do is to work in partnership. And that's, I think, the Scottish Government have managed to do so far. They've put aside those differences in order to try and achieve something greater. And that's why we've been prepared to cooperate and work in partnership with them. That's why we would be in support of a job guarantee scheme. Because I think the report is right when it talks about preventing the scarring in the economy and of young people. Because we know that it is our young people and broadly our people that will be the future strength of our economy. If we invest in the skills and the talents of those people, we will grow the economy. We will make it sustainable. So that's why it's right to have a jobs guarantee scheme. But I was disappointed in the timidity of parts of the report. In fact, its dismissal of a universal basic income. It lacked that kind of ambition and aspiration. I thought it should have been included. And I would have expected the Minister to have made some comment on that, because I know that she is a strong supporter on that, and perhaps she will reflect on that in her closing comments. Because the universal basic income would help to fill the gaps in the various financial schemes that have emerged, to make sure that no one is left behind through this period. And it might be something that would be quite useful in the future as we move towards automation, to make sure that everyone has a stake in society and an income that they can survive on too. I was interested in the aspects of government intervention, because I think it is important that during this recovery period that we do support the businesses that are perhaps on the edge, that are vital and pivotal for the future of our economy, whether it's being sustainable, whether it's innovative, whether it's the high-wage jobs that we're seeking for in terms of high wages and high skills, but also on the environmental side too. But we need to have an understanding about what the rules of this are. We need to understand that this is not just about propping up failing businesses that won't have a future without that government support. So I think it's important that the government tries to set out the rules and the understanding, because we need to seek the right advice from the right parts of business and investment to make sure that government is using its quite restricted money wisely. And if we can get those decisions right for the future, then we will be able to protect the right businesses rather than just failing businesses. But ultimately, what we need to do is invest in the skills and the talents of our people, so that everyone has got a stake in the future of our country. By working in partnership between Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom, by putting those differences aside to deal with one of the most significant challenges this country has ever faced. And I think I want to close by agreeing with Kenny Gibson. The last thing we need just now is a no-deal Brexit or a damaging Brexit. We need to combine together with all our friends and neighbours and allies. And with that, we will defeat this virus. Thank you.
Andy Whiteman, for up to 4 minutes, please.
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer. In the short time I had available, I wasn't able to reflect on the striking comment in the foreword to the report where the group says, and I quote, "It's illustrative to consider that 90% of the top 50% of earners in the country can work from home, while 90% of the bottom 50% cannot do so." That encapsulates a very significant issue that's arisen during this pandemic, but it's also a reflection of the fact the report doesn't address what we're going to do about that, how we need to change working patterns, what the impact that's going to have on workplaces and offices, etc. And so there's a lot more work to do to flesh out some very useful observations to actually a plan of action for the longer term. I also reflect in my opening remarks on the focus on the local, and again the report talks about proposing, and I quote, "an approach to recovery and economic development that is grounded in local and regional approaches and partnerships." But it's hard to see how we can do that, because we don't have the ecosystem to do that. Local government's hollowed out. There's been a vast amount of centralisation, as Willie Rennie pointed out. And much of the thrust of this report is focused on businesses and government working together. missing these important local actors. It talks indeed in Recommendation 17, yes, about a place-based approach, but the landscape here is increasingly not only hollowed out, but messy. We've got city-region deals and local economic development partnerships and enterprise agencies, etc. A significant transformation, if that's what we're looking for, would include a significant transfer of fiscal, economic and political power to Scotland's 32 local authorities and even more to a local network of municipal authorities. Now, members' contributions were interesting and useful. Richard Leonard talked about democratising the economy, and that goes to the heart of how our economy has been increasingly owned and run, and we know that mutuals and co-ops provide much, much greater social and economic returns. Willie Rennie talked about the need for regional economic development, and I've just reflected on that. There's very little in the report about how to do that. Dean Lockhart criticised the remit as the reason why the report perhaps wasn't as ambitious. And in many regards, I perhaps accept that that was at the root of it. But particularly the Fraser-Valander critique of the lack of focus on practical next steps, I very much agree with. And the Cabinet Secretary intervened on Mr Lockhart to ask about the UK Government response, which seems to be largely about getting people back shopping. With money that people no longer have, and by definition for non-essential items, then that highlights a structural weakness in the UK and the Scottish economy. Over 60% of GDP is on household consumption, and that's not really a basis for a sustainable economy. On some of the individual recommendations which I didn't have time to talk about, Recommendation 9 on conditionality and business support, very useful, yes, but very important to point out that non-domestic rate relief is not it is an appropriate short-term relief, but it's not a long-term response, as it results in greater returns to landlords if rents are not reduced to the same extent. I'm uncomfortable with the language around natural capital, but we can leave that. On tourism, I thought it was said some very useful things on tourism. Tourism is probably one of those areas where we can actually Bruce Crawford highlighted this, can come forward with a plan in relatively short order, because at a UK level we have a £17 billion deficit in tourism. In other words, that's the amount of money that leaves the country over and above the money that's spent on domestic tourism. So things like a 4-day week would help considerably on that. It talks about workplace innovations, yes, very important again, but nothing on ownership and governance. And I always welcome Alec Neil's contribution to the debate. He's right about the Bank of England, and I highlighted this in the debate last week about the hundreds of billions of pounds of quantitative easing that is just exacerbating inequality, and we should have more control over spending our share of that. Presiding Officer, time is so desperately short. I'll just conclude on an observation again from the Wellbeing Alliance, where they say a wellbeing economy is one that's purposed and designed explicitly for human and ecological well-being, economic activity in service of these higher order goals. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Rhoda Grant for up to 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The report and the debate are welcome. The report is high level with very little practical guidance on what the government should be doing now. And while it lists many of the challenges, it does not have the detailed steps required to kickstart our economy that I think many people sought from it. Richard Leonard talked about the job guarantee scheme, and we certainly welcome the recommendation for this within the report. It's something we've been pushing the government for some time, and I hope that they will now move on this quickly and create such a scheme. It needs to focus on young people, women, black and ethnic minority workers and disabled people who we know are the hardest hit by recession. The Resolution Foundation pointed out that the least well-off are bearing the brunt of this pandemic, and this was echoed by the Poverty Alliance today. The delay in the Scottish child payment also contributes to child poverty, and this is the time when this payment should be speeded up rather than delayed to help families in this situation. Willie Rennie talked about women and the requirement to have childcare in place before they could return to work, and it does appear a bit cart before the horse that people are being asked to come back to work, but there is no childcare in place. And this is a situation that particularly affects people in Kirkwall and Orkney, where the childcare provider, PD Breeks, is going to close at the end of this month. So there will be no nursery care, there will be no childcare, and there will be no after-school care available to people wanting to return to work and we need to do something about that to make sure that is there for women, especially returning to work, who can suffer from poverty disproportionately. Neither can we build our economy on a case-by-case industrial strategy. We need to build a manufacturing base, a green recovery, as Jackie Bailey said in her speech. We have the resources, we have offshore wind, but we have none of the jobs coming here. We have the opportunity now, and indeed the powers, to do this differently. So let's use them to create a just transition. And also look at things like green energy and retrofitting that would create jobs and also tackle climate change. Gillian Martin talked about tackling climate change has to be the thread that runs through every policy action. This was something the Scottish Labour Party were calling for at this year's budget and continue to call for. Other speakers talked about digital connectivity, and indeed I very much agree with that. But we need more than just connectivity. We need the ability to access it. We've seen a lot of less well-off families being told to learn online, children being told to do their lessons online, but they don't have either the laptop to access it or indeed the connectivity if they're lucky enough to be in a school that provides them with the equipment. Richard Leonard talked about community wealth building, using procurement to invest in our communities, and I think this is really important, looking at co-ops, looking at mutuals, looking at organisations that actually keep wealth in our local economies and create jobs there too. And we need to look at things like community empowerment and land reform, representing rural areas. It's really important that we empower people in those areas to make decisions for themselves and to build their economy. Presiding officer, the coronavirus has torn down the old order, and indeed it's devastated many lives. And it's been most devastating to those who have least. And we're at a crossroads between rebuilding the old order or creating a new order. A new economy that's fair and that's based on equality. An economy that does not allow people to accumulate vast wealth at the detriment of others. The Scottish Government need to decide now which it will be, and we urge them to build a new order.
Call Donald Cameron for under 5 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. As colleagues have already intimated, we welcome the publication of this report, and we express thanks to Benny Higgins and others for putting it together so quickly. We also welcome several of the recommendations. There are interesting and innovative ideas, the 4 pillars of capital, with a focus on natural and human capital in particular. Like others, we welcome the overarching focus on job retention, which has to be at the forefront of our economic recovery from the virus. And we note the proposals to bring the private and public sector together to develop a jobs guarantee scheme, as others have spoken about during this debate. And we look forward to seeing that in further detail. And we also note the calls to increase private sector investments in projects alongside the public sector, and the suggestion that the Scottish National Investment Bank work closely with the third sector and universities and community projects in particular. And I especially welcome the recommendation we need to scale up and accelerate planned investment in Scotland's digital infrastructure, which will be particularly beneficial to rural communities such as the Highlands and Islands. And the report is correct on that issue and on others too, to urge more constructive work between the Scottish Government and the UK Government's a point made by Jackie Bailey in her speech, not least because Scotland needs access to the capital investment and economic firepower of the UK. And I acknowledge too the candour with which the report accepts that relations between the Scottish Government and the business community need to be much, much better. There is a palpable sense of disconnect between ministers and business right now, and that relationship has degenerated to such an extent that it requires to be resuscitated, let alone reset. Now, of course, I recognise that this is an independent report, and the Scottish Government may well choose to do things differently. And we on these benches will work where we can with that government to get our economy back on track. However, what is abundantly clear is that Scotland's workers and businesses need swift measures and practical help now, a point made by Andy Whiteman and others throughout this debate. To wait until the end of July for this to happen is simply inadequate. Jobs and livelihoods are at stake now. The situation is urgent now. It is without doubt an emergency, and we all welcomed the swiftness with which both the UK and the Scottish governments responded to support workers and businesses at the beginning of this crisis. But that same urgency needs to be replicated at this point in time with similar radical and decisive action, because otherwise the pandemic will wreak economic havoc. Now, I acknowledge that the report itself calls for urgency in a number of areas, particularly where jobs are concerned. But as the FSB noted, time cannot be lost in generating paperwork and organising meetings. From day one, they say, the focus must be on delivery and how the proposals practically impact local businesses and the wider community they serve. And in this regard, I do venture to make some more critical comments about how the ideas in the report are to be delivered. Because there is no clear roadmap with timescales, no definitive strategy, no concrete plans. This point was made by Dean Lockhart. It's a civil servant's dream, as someone put it to me. Looking at the recommendations, many of them are general. They're of no practical use to sectors of the economy which are struggling as we speak. And lots of people have quoted the Fraser of Allender Institute, including Murdo Fraser, who said there is little in the report of substantial policy insight that is new or different to what has gone before. If this report and the government's response to this report is simply to keep doing the stuff we've always been doing, then we are lost. I was very struck by a couple of comments made by members. I'd like to briefly mention them. Willie Rennie spoke about the effects on women, especially low-paid women, and acknowledging their childcare needs so that they can work, and he was right to do so. Bruce Crawford spoke about the hospitality industry in his constituency, and that's something I feel representing the Highlands and Islands, the 3 winters that many people in that industry will experience. Jackie Bailey, in my view, was right to warn against bringing forward a review of the fiscal framework when the economic shock is unknown. And I might add to that we should not be doing so during this crisis. Deputy Presiding Officer, we welcome the general thrust of this report and several of its recommendations. We are prepared to work where we can with the government, but as well-intentioned as it is not enough. Scotland's workers and businesses cannot wait another month or more to be told what action the Scottish Government will take. We are at a pivotal moment. So my plea is this to the Cabinet Secretary. Let this not be a moment when the Scottish Government buries itself in new strategies, in workforces, in task forces and working groups, because we need courage. We need courage to make difficult decisions, courage to act swiftly and boldly, and courage to rescue at once and right away the jobs and livelihoods of people across Scotland. Thank you.
Call Fiona Hislop to wind up in this debate for no more than 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I thank the members here today for engaging, on the most part, constructively on the content and recommendations contained within the Advisory Group's report, and also for the recognition of their work in a very compressed timescale. As Donald Cameron has pointed out, this is an independent advisory report. It's commissioned by the government, but it's not our report. Indeed, it is a report for all of Scotland. And I think the task now is about how we deliver the points that we do agree with. And part of this debate is identifying those areas where there is consensus. So I think it is helpful that there is consensus on that green recovery, that there is consensus on a job guarantee, that there is consensus on the digital route for both jobs and indeed recovery. Now, perhaps some of these may have been considered before. The job guarantee has been debated before. There's more urgency, I think, in terms of the scale of our response required. But I don't think that's a problem, that some of these things have been areas that we wanted to work on before. What is the issue is the acceleration and scale. And I think what the report does do is bring to our attention this sheer scale of what is required. Now, depending on what angle of the lens you want to look at, the issue about the scale of response that's required, a number of people have said, the cost of this, what would that be? It will be considerable if we are in reality going to achieve what is in this report. Now, the Fraser of Allender might have quoted if you let me develop my point, the Fraser of Allender might have appointed that £7 billion is what is required for Scotland to achieve what is necessary in terms of recovery. And as both Annabel Ewing and others have pointed out, if you look at what Germany has done, Germany has already announced, unlike the UK government, its fiscal and economic stimulus response. And 4% of GDP would be the equivalent of £6 billion for Scotland in terms of investment. Now, that's the sheer scale of what is going to be required. And I think if we have to identify the importance of this report, it is making sure we understand what it is we have to do and the urgency with which we must do it. But I also agree, as Maurice Golden had pointed out, that it does not tell us the how we do this. That is what all of us, and not just in this Parliament, but also the challenges to business and indeed some of it to the UK Government to deliver on this. So other countries have developed their recovery plans. If you look at New Zealand's recovery plan, they also use the OECD's 4 capital approach as well, and some people have commented on that. And there are challenges within this, depending on how you look at it, as to what it will mean that we will do differently. I think we've heard from both Willie Rennie, Andy Whiteman and Kenny Gibson, the focus on a regional approach that is in the report. Now, I think we're agreement that place-based approach is important, but I think that would pivot and change how we're dealing with things in certain areas. In terms of other areas, I think in terms of some of the aspects on education, and we heard from the Deputy First Minister £100 million to help those that have been left further behind. We heard from Jackie Bailey and indeed Maurice Golden and others about the importance of a green recovery. I think the publication, particularly of Scottish Power's prospectus, is very strong. They're very practical things that can be done, and I would hope collectively with government on that. Richard Lennon had lots of different ideas within his contribution, and I think the point is that the foundation of this report doesn't exclude other ideas, but it is a platform to provide a focus for it. But he was absolutely clear, and I agree with him, that we cannot have another round of austerity, and that is not acceptable. And a consensus around that would make a big difference in our approach as well. Andy Whiteman, in a very interesting speech, also talked about funding models, and I think that's where some of the creativity, particularly in support for how we can do things differently, are very important. I agree with Willie Rennie in relation to economy and childcare. I think that point is well made, and I think this crisis has absolutely shone the light on the importance of care, and particularly for children and older people. And in terms of a value-based recovery, I think that's very important indeed. Gillian Martin identified for the North East what I think is a real pressure point of 4 points of pressure: COVID, Brexit, oil prices and the climate change. And I think looking at the analysis there, that is going to be very important in our response. I'll take one brief intervention.
Liam Kerr.
Grateful. I'll be very brief. Would you acknowledge that there's another point of a severe problem up in the North East, which is the business rates regime that the government's brought in?
Fiona Hislop.
I think a rapid action on business rates has helped tourism, has helped hospitality, and indeed the other packages of support we have been very, very important indeed. And I remember speaking to the rest of Scotland about their concern about the very rapid and swift movement to support the businesses in the North East, particularly when there was issues in Aberdeen previously. So I hope that the approach we can take is not to exclude good ideas, to have an ambition that we can bring people together to take us forward, to make sure that the how, and I think that is our point, it's why we want to make sure we have got actions. Don't confuse Donald Cameron restart and the measures that are required for immediate restart with what is in recovery. And I look forward to hearing the United Kingdom's recovery stimulus. No, I said I'd take one intervention, and I've taken that. In terms of different ideas that are on this, I'm looking at interest with digital sales tax and whether Murdo Fraser thinks that we should have the powers within this Parliament to do that kind of activity or not. But in relation to some of the other points that have been taken, I do think VAT reduction, as pointed out with Bruce Crawford, is really important. Remember, tourism currently in Scotland has the second highest VAT rate charged in it in the whole of the EU. So in terms of stimulus and support, immediately, I think that's an important area. But I think the report also identifies the role of tourism and hospitality across Scotland, and I'm glad that they've done that. This is an ambitious report. Yes, it might reinforce the direction of some of the areas that we'd previously been looking at. But our challenge is to work together to accelerate that, and particularly for our young people, the actions that we must take with our colleges, our universities, our business-led response in terms of job guarantee. We know that can work. It happened in Edinburgh 10 years ago. It was successful. Now we have to roll that out, I would hope, in the wide canvas. As explained, this is not a government report, it's an independent report, and I value it for that basis. What we need to do, though, is to respond to it, and that's what I intend to do, as requested, by the end of July, to make sure that we have got that action-based recovery plan for Scotland. Be ambitious, let's work together. We owe it to the people of Scotland, and I hope together we can help deliver something that will allow us to come through this dreadful situation in a position to put Scotland on the track to recovery.
That concludes the debate on Advisory Group on Economic Recovery recommendations, and it's now time to move on to the next item of business, and we will shortly move on to the Stage 3 proceedings on the Civil Partnership Scotland Bill.